The 1980s didn't just redefine horror, it weaponized it. Filmmakers weren't afraid to get weird, wild, or downright disturbing. The decade gave us new monsters, unforgettable screams, and practical effects so convincing they still haunt our dreams. Whether it was a killer doll, a haunted house, or a nightmare that struck while you slept, the 80s turned fear into entertainment like never before. Today, we're counting down the top 10 classic horror films that made the 1980s the golden age of terror. No movie captured the eerie suburban unease of the 1980s quite like Poltergeist. Produced by Steven Spielberg and directed by Tobe Hooper, this film made viewers question what might be lurking inside their own television sets. At first, the Freeling family seems to live an ordinary American dream, a beautiful home, 2 kids, and a new life in California. But when their young daughter begins speaking to the TV, a gateway to something dark and hungry is opened. What follows is a masterclass in tension and spectacle. The film blends Spielberg's family-friendly warmth with Hooper's raw sense of terror, a combination that made every bump in the night feel personal. Practical effects still impress today. Chairs stack themselves, faces peel away in mirrors, and a child's bedroom becomes a vortex to another dimension. Beyond the screen, rumors of the Poltergeist curse only deepened its legend. Several cast members died under tragic circumstances, leading many fans to wonder if the production had invited something unholy of its own. Decades later, the film still balances wonder and terror so seamlessly that it feels timeless, a bridge between Spielberg's suburban fantasies and Hooper's gritty nightmares. And as those static waves flicker across the screen, you can't help but glance over your shoulder and wonder who might be watching from the other side. By the late 80s, horror fans thought they'd seen it all. Masked killers, haunted houses, creatures from beyond. But then came Child's Play, and terror found a new pint-sized form. When serial killer Charles Lee Ray is mortally wounded, he performs a voodoo ritual that transfers his soul into a good guy doll named Chucky. What follows is a wickedly inventive blend of supernatural horror and dark comedy, one that made every kid side-eye their toys before bed. Directed by Tom Holland and brought to life through groundbreaking animatronics and a sinister voice performance from Brad Dourif, Child's Play was unlike anything before it. The sight of a harmless doll turning murderous was both absurd and horrifying, the perfect combination for 1980s audiences craving something fresh. Chucky wasn't hiding in shadows, he was front and center, laughing maniacally as he plotted his next kill. At its core, the film tapped into primal fears, the loss of control, corrupted innocence, and the idea that evil can disguise itself in something as ordinary as a child's plaything. While critics were initially divided, Child's Play quickly became a cult sensation, spawning one of the most iconic horror franchises in history. Because if the 80s taught us anything, it's that, in horror, even the smallest monsters can make the biggest messes. If pure chaos had a movie, it would look a lot like Evil Dead 2. Sam Raimi took the raw terror of his low-budget original and dialed it up to delirious perfection. More blood, more madness, and far more personality. Released in 1987, the film isn't just a sequel. It's part remake, part reinvention, and part fever dream. It follows Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, as he returns to that cursed cabin in the woods and accidentally unleashes demonic forces once again. But this time, Raimi leaned hard into absurdity, blood geysers, possessed limbs, and talking deer heads, all shot with manic camera work that feels alive on its own. The result was a film that didn't just terrify audiences, it made them laugh, cringe, and cheer all at once. Campbell's performance became the stuff of legend, equal parts tragic and hilarious, embodying the everyman who just can't catch a break. What truly set Evil Dead 2 apart was its tone. It was gory but fun, terrifying but ridiculous, a genre experiment that somehow worked perfectly. The film proved horror could be self-aware without losing its edge, paving the way for decades of horror-comedy hybrids that followed. And as Ash strapped on his chainsaw and growled, "Groovy," audiences realized something. Horror didn't have to be serious to be unforgettable. When Clive Barker unleashed Hellraiser in 1987, audiences weren't ready for what they saw or felt. This wasn't a simple slasher or ghost story. It was something far darker, drenched in gothic beauty and unspeakable pain. Adapted from Barker's own novella, The Hellbound Heart, the film introduced us to one of horror's most unforgettable icons. Pinhead, leader of the Cenobites, demonic beings who blur the line between pleasure and agony. The story begins with the mysterious puzzle box that promises ultimate pleasure to whoever solves it. But when Frank Cotton opens it, he discovers the box's true purpose, a gateway to a dimension of torment. Torn apart and reborn, Frank's hunger for sensation drives him to commit monstrous acts, dragging his family into his twisted nightmare. What made Hellraiser so shocking wasn't just its violence, it was its philosophy. Barker explored obsession, temptation, and the darkness that lives inside human desire. The film's gruesome practical effects, hooks tearing flesh, bodies reforming from blood, were so vividly disturbing they felt almost too real. Unlike most horror villains, Pinhead wasn't motivated by revenge or hatred. He was something much colder, a being enforcing the rules of his hellish order. With its haunting design, bold themes, and unflinching imagery, Hellraiser didn't just scare audiences, it seduced them, proving that sometimes true horror is what we secretly crave. It starts as a simple backpacking trip through the English countryside and ends as one of the most unforgettable transformations in horror history. An American Werewolf in London, 1981, directed by comedy mastermind John Landis, shocked audiences with how easily it blended humor and horror into one wild ride. The story follows two American friends attacked by a mysterious creature on the moors. One dies and the other, David, begins to realize he's been cursed. What follows is both tragic and terrifying. David is haunted by his dead friend's decaying ghost, warning him of what's to come. Then comes the transformation, a sequence so realistic and painful it earned the first ever Oscar for Best Makeup. Watching bones stretch, skin twist, and fur erupt from flesh was more than a horror effect. It was an event. Landis's ability to balance gruesome horror with wry humor gave the movie an identity all its own. You laugh one moment and recoil the next, never sure which emotion to trust. Beneath the gory spectacle lies a story of loneliness and inevitability, a man doomed by forces he can't control. More than 40 years later, An American Werewolf in London still stands as the gold standard for transformation horror, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster inside us is the one we can't escape. Body horror had existed before The Fly, but never like this. In 1986, visionary director David Cronenberg took a simple sci-fi premise and turned it into a haunting exploration of obsession, decay, and the fragility of being human. Starring Jeff Goldblum in one of his most mesmerizing performances, the film follows eccentric scientist Seth Brundle as he tests his teleportation device, only to realize too late that a common housefly has joined him in the pod. What begins as a scientific triumph slowly mutates into a waking nightmare. At first, Brundle's transformation seems like a miracle. Sharper senses, boundless energy, almost superhuman strength. But soon his body starts to betray him. Teeth fall out, skin sloughs away, and insect instincts begin to take over. It's horrifying, yet heartbreakingly tragic. Cronenberg's brilliance lies in how he grounds the grotesque in emotion. The Fly isn't just about a man turning into a monster. It's about watching genius dissolve into madness and love give way to pity. Geena Davis delivers a stunning performance as Veronica, the woman who loves Brundle, even as his humanity rots before her eyes. The film's groundbreaking practical effects remain jaw-dropping, but it's the emotional core that endures. Few horror films have ever made viewers cry and recoil in the same breath, and The Fly manages both flawlessly. What started as a quick attempt to cash in on Halloween's success became one of the most unstoppable forces in horror history. Friday the 13th, released in 1980, introduced the world to Camp Crystal Lake, a place forever cursed by tragedy, teenage recklessness, and a vengeful spirit that refused to die. The premise was simple. A group of counselors arrives at an abandoned summer camp to prepare for reopening, unaware of the dark history surrounding the drowning of a young boy named Jason Voorhees. What follows is a brutal string of murders that turned low-budget slasher filmmaking into a cultural phenomenon. With its shocking twist ending, revealing the killer's true identity, audiences left theaters stunned and terrified. Tom Savini's practical gore effects, achieved on a shoestring budget, set a new bar for on-screen violence and creativity. And when Jason finally took up the iconic hockey mask in the sequels, the legend was cemented. Friday the 13th didn't just create a monster, it created a formula: teenagers, isolation, and consequences. It became the blueprint for countless horror imitators, proving that fear could be profitable and endlessly repeatable. Over 4 decades later, Jason remains one of cinema's most recognizable villains. And every time Friday the 13th appears on the calendar, fans can't help but wonder if somewhere out there, he's still watching from the woods. By the mid-1980s, the slasher genre had already flooded theaters. Masked killers, blood, and familiar tropes were everywhere. But then Wes Craven gave the genre a new kind of monster, one who didn't need a mask, a weapon, or even reality itself. A Nightmare on Elm Street introduced Freddy Krueger, the sadistic dream-stalker who turned sleep into the deadliest danger imaginable. Played with devilish charisma by Robert Englund, Freddy wasn't just another silent killer. He talked, taunted his victims, toyed with them, and made horror strangely entertaining again. His burnt face, striped sweater, and razor-tipped glove became instant pop culture icons. The film's premise was pure genius. What if you could die in your dreams and never wake up? Craven masterfully blurred the line between waking life and nightmare, using surreal visuals and groundbreaking practical effects. From the geyser of blood erupting from Johnny Depp's bed to walls that flexed like rubber, every moment felt like something you weren't supposed to see. But beneath the fantasy, Elm Street tapped into something real. The universal fear of losing control, of being hunted when we're most vulnerable. It wasn't just scary. It was imaginative, bizarre, and unforgettable. In one stroke, Wes Craven reinvented the slasher, gave the 80s a villain it could never forget, and made audiences terrified to close their eyes. Isolation, paranoia, mistrust. The Thing, 1982, turned these simple human fears into one of the most chilling horror experiences ever filmed. Directed by John Carpenter, the movie follows a group of scientists stranded at an Antarctic research station who discover an alien life form capable of perfectly imitating any living thing. And that's where the terror begins, because no one can be sure who's still human. Starring Kurt Russell as the rugged and skeptical MacReady, The Thing slowly transforms from a mystery into a nightmare of claustrophobic tension. The real star, though, is the creature itself, brought to life by Rob Bottin's groundbreaking practical effects. Mutating limbs, screaming faces, and grotesque transformations made audiences gasp in both horror and awe. Every frame feels alive, slimy, and terrifyingly unpredictable. When it first hit theaters, The Thing was dismissed by critics and overshadowed by Spielberg's more optimistic E.T. But time revealed the truth. Carpenter's vision was ahead of its time. Darker, smarter, and far more unsettling. Today, it's regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made, blending science fiction and psychological dread with perfection. At its heart, The Thing isn't just about monsters. It's about the collapse of trust, the fear that the person beside you might not be who they seem. And in that frozen wasteland, suspicion becomes the deadliest weapon of all. Few horror films are as hypnotic, haunting, or endlessly discussed as The Shining. Released in 1980 and directed by Stanley Kubrick, it wasn't just a ghost story, it was a descent into madness, isolation, and the darker corners of the human mind. Based on Stephen King's novel, it stars Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, a struggling writer who takes a job as winter caretaker of the remote Overlook Hotel, bringing along his wife Wendy and psychic son Danny. As snow traps the family inside, the hotel begins to unravel them. Danny sees terrifying visions. Twin girls in the hallway, rivers of blood, whispers from unseen forces. And Jack, tormented by writer's block and supernatural influence, spirals into violent insanity. Kubrick's meticulous direction turned every hallway, every echoing typewriter key, into a symphony of unease. Nicholson's performance became the stuff of legend. His maniacal grin, his axe smashing through the door, and that immortal line,
"Here's Johnny!"
Shelley Duvall's terrified realism only amplified the dread, grounding the film's surreal terror in raw emotion. More than 4 decades later, The Shining remains one of cinema's most analyzed films. Its symbolism, symmetry, and dreamlike pacing have kept fans debating its true meaning for generations. Whether you see it as a haunted house movie or a portrait of madness, one thing's certain: The Shining doesn't just scare you, it stays with you. The 1980s didn't just give us horror movies, it gave us nightmares that still live rent-free in our minds. From haunted houses and masked killers to dream demons and cosmic terrors, this decade redefined what fear could look like on screen. These 10 films proved that horror can be smart, stylish, and deeply human, long after the screams fade. Which of these 80s classics still keeps you up at night? Drop a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more timeless Hollywood horrors.